You've achieved a series of tactical successes, but are on the verge of a strategic loss because we are now negotiating.
I just think it's so foolish. Here we are in a committee in the United States Senate, 74 days in, and you're talking about strategic loss. We have the ability to defeat a 47-year threat of a pursuit of a nuclear weapon. We have more leverage than we've ever had. We've had incredible battlefield successes, and you're talking about a strategic loss?
Mr. Secretary.
In disingenuous questions.
Senator Coons, if you want to ask a couple questions until he arrives.
Thank you, Senator Murkowski. Mr. Secretary, I'm just going to follow up on the questions I asked in my first round and the questions that had been asked by members of both parties. In my assessment, there was no imminent threat to the United States that justified the president using his Article II powers, and there was insufficient preparation to make sure that we had the right troops, the right capability deployed. There used to be a consensus in national security that America should only go to war when there's an imminent threat to our national security, when all other options have been exhausted, and when we have clear objectives and a plan for how it ends. As General Kane testified, the military was given 3 clear goals: sink the Navy, attack and destroy the ballistic missile launchers, and degrade their defense industrial base, and you've accomplished those. But President Trump celebrated regime change after saying that regime change was the real goal. And our NATO allies have delivered. They have allowed overflight, they have allowed projection of force despite not being consulted. You said just a few moments ago, Mr. Secretary, we control the Strait. But it's clear that reopening the Strait of Hormuz for commercial traffic eludes us, in no small part because Iran retains a robust stockpile of cheap, lethal Shahed drones, and they are getting help from our adversaries in rebuilding them. What is your plan for reopening the Strait of Hormuz, Mr. Secretary?
I would just note that the majority of your question was highly disingenuous and loaded with suggestions that I very much don't agree with. From the beginning,
please feel free, sir, to pick any one of those
From the
things.
beginning, we've been very clear about the military objectives and the underlying strategic objective, which is preventing Iran from getting a nuclear weapon.
Yes.
Take, for example, the fact that Iranians' conventional Navy, they had aircraft carriers with Shahed drones on them before this started. They had full-on destroyers and battleship capabilities, none of which they have anymore. And
did the Iranian Navy have aircraft carriers?
Iranian Navy had 3 drone aircraft carriers. The Iranian Navy had 11
launch
submarines.
Platforms for drones, sure.
They had 11 submarines.
And you've sunk all of the regular Navy. Great, good.
They retain fast boat capabilities, which they've always had. We understand that, which we can control for and will. We've degraded almost completely their defense industrial base capabilities. The idea that they control anything, you can terrorize something, you can hold it at issue with piracy, as I've talked about at the Pentagon podium time and time again. That doesn't mean you control it. We control what goes in and out, and we control whether or not we have to restart conflict. The president does as well.
Mr.
So
Secretary,
we're the ones that will manage where this goes in the future, and they have very limited ability to set the tempo or respond to it, and that gives the president a lot of options to ensure that Iran never gets a nuclear weapon.
The connection between their ability to close the Strait of Hormuz using fast boats and Shahed drones and our strategic goal, shared broadly, to prevent them from ever having a usable nuclear weapon is utterly unclear to me. And my question was, what's the plan for reopening the Strait of Hormuz to commercial traffic, given skyrocketing
broadly, but never
prices?
Executed. Shared broadly, but never executed, because previous administration didn't have the willingness to actually do what it would take. And when Iran was at its weakest moments following the 12-day war, but still wanted the pursuit of a nuclear capability, President Trump made the courageous decision to go at their conventional umbrella and shield, which they were using to protect their nuclear program, which we knew came with threats and branches and sequels.
My concern, Mr. Secretary, is that you've achieved a series of tactical successes, but are on the verge of a strategic loss because we are now negotiating.
I just think it's so foolish. Here we are in a committee in the United States Senate, 74 days in, and you're talking about strategic loss. We have the ability to defeat a 47-year threat of a pursuit of a nuclear weapon. We have more leverage than we've ever had. We've had incredible battlefield successes, and you're talking about a strategic loss,
Mr. Secretary,
in disingenuous questions.
Mr. Secretary,
this is how you undercut efforts that could otherwise and are otherwise being very effective.
I am not your enemy, sir. I am not your adversary. I share your goal of preventing Iran from ever having a usable nuclear weapon. To finish my sentence, control of the Strait of Hormuz the ability to degrade our partners and allies' gas and oil production capabilities through cheap drones, the ability to harass and harry commercial shipping remains in Iran's hands. And their demands are that we recognize sovereignty for them over the Strait of Hormuz, which I believe our president's rejected, you've rejected, I reject. But my question remains, how do we reopen the Strait of Hormuz to commercial shipping? If we control it, how do we reopen it? And your average American is seeing this at the gas pump every single day as the cost of gas continues to rise.
Senator Coons, I know that your question has not yet been responded to.
And it deserves an answer.
It does
But I
deserve
also
an
understand I'm
answer.
delaying my colleagues. But that's the question that deserves an answer, Mr. Secretary.
We do have Senator Kennedy.
All right, everyone, settle in. We aren't just looking at a standard congressional hearing today. We are looking at a fundamental breakdown in how the United States manages global power in 2026. This is the Senate Appropriations Committee, and the tension between Senator Chris Coons and the new Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, is thick enough to cut with a combat knife. What you're seeing here is the friction between battlefield success and economic reality. It's the age-old question. If you win the fight but go broke in the process, did you actually win? Let's set the stage for the educational deep dive. To understand why Coons is so frustrated, you have to understand the 12-day war of June 2025. The U.S. military, under the rebranded Department of War, launched a massive, decapitating strike against Iran. As Coons admits, the tactical objectives were met with terrifying efficiency. The Iranian Navy? It's basically an underwater museum now. Their ballistic missile launchers? Melted. Their defense industrial base? Degraded to the point of being non-existent. On a whiteboard in the Pentagon, that is a 100% score. Pete Hegseth is leaning into that total victory narrative because that's the America First brand. He's telling you that the conventional threat from Iran is dead. But here is where the story behind the script gets messy. Senator Coons is pointing out the Shahed Paradox. We destroyed their battleships, their destroyers, and their submarines. But Iran didn't just give up, they went into insurgency mode. Instead of a $1 billion destroyer, they are now using $20,000 Shahed 136 drones, those cheap lethal drones Coons keeps mentioning. These things are basically flying lawnmowers packed with explosives. You can launch them from a flatbed truck or a fishing boat. You don't need a high-tech port to operate them. Because of these drones and the fast boats that still swarm the Strait of Hormuz, the most important oil choke point in the world is functionally closed to commercial traffic. Hegseth claims the U.S. controls the strait. And physically, he's right. If a ship flies an American flag, it's probably safe. But commercial shipping? Insurance companies like Lloyd's of London won't touch a tanker going through the Strait of Hormuz right now. The risk of a cheap drone hitting a $100 million cargo of crude oil is too high. This is why the gas pump in your neighborhood is hitting $6.50 or $7. Coons is looking at Hegseth and saying, the mission wasn't just to sink ships, it was to keep the world running. And right now, the world is stalled. Now, let's talk about Hegseth's response, because it reveals the 2026 war doctrine. Hegseth calls Coons' questions disingenuous. That is a massive insult in a Senate hearing. Hegseth is effectively telling the legislative branch that their oversight doesn't matter because the strategic goal of preventing a nuclear weapon is the only metric that counts. Hegseth reveals that Iran had 3 drone aircraft carriers and 11 submarines for drones, all of which were sunk. For the audience, this is a huge reveal. It shows that Iran was trying to build a power projection navy, and the U.S. wiped it out in 74 days of conflict. But Coons is worried about the strategic loss. He's arguing that by being so aggressive, the U.S. has alienated its NATO allies. Coons points out that while NATO allowed overflights, they weren't consulted. In the 2026 era, consultation has been replaced by notification. The U.S. says, we are doing this, get out of the way. Coons is warning that this America First arrogance might win the 12-day war, but it leaves us alone for the 20-year peace. If our allies won't help us patrol the strait because they're mad they weren't consulted, the U.S. taxpayer has to foot the entire bill. Here is the educational part you need to understand about the Strait of Hormuz. Is a literal choke point. If you look at a map, it's only about 21 miles wide at its narrowest point. 20% of the world's petroleum passes through there. If Iran can use asymmetric warfare, which is fancy talk for hitting expensive things with cheap things, they can win by simply making the war too expensive for the U.S. to continue. Coons is accusing Hegseth of having no plan for the day after. We sank the Navy, we killed the leaders, but the oil still isn't flowing. Hegseth's counterargument is that previous administrations, meaning the Biden era, didn't have the willingness to do what it took. He's framing the 2026 administration as the courageous ones who finally popped the Iranian nuclear umbrella. To Hegseth, the tactical success, i.e. the strategic win, because it removes the threat of a nuclear-armed Iran forever. He views the high gas prices as a temporary tactical friction that the American people should be willing to pay for national security. But watch the body language in this script. Coons says, "I am not your adversary." He's trying to find a middle ground, but Hegseth isn't looking for friends. He's looking for total alignment. This is the new reality of the Department of War. It is unapologetic, it is aggressive, and it views anyone asking about exit plans as being weak or disingenuous. The most troubling part of this script, as Coons would say, is the fact that Iran's demands haven't changed. They want sovereignty over the strait. They want the U.S. to leave. And even though their navy is at the bottom of the sea, they are still harassing and harrying commercial shipping. This tells us that the military force used in 2025 didn't actually break the Iranian will. It just changed their tactics. For the average viewer, the takeaway is simple. We are in a stalemate. We own the water, but we can't guarantee the safety of the oil. We have incredible battlefield successes, but we have an average American seeing this at the gas pump every single day. Hegseth promises more leverage than we've ever had, but Coons is asking the question that will decide the next election. When does the leverage turn into lower gas prices? This hearing is the front line of the 2026 political war. It's the fight between a war secretary who wants to win at any cost and a Senate committee that is terrified of the bill coming due. As you watch this, remember, the boats might be sunk, but the war for the Strait of Hormuz is just moving into a more dangerous, invisible phase. Drones, piracy, and economic blackmail are the new weapons, and according to this script, the U.S. is still trying to figure out how to open a door that Iran has jammed with a $20,000 piece of plastic. Keep your eyes on the regime change mention. Hegseth implies that the strategic objective is preventing the nuke, but Coons catches him admitting that Trump celebrated regime change. This is the real endgame. The U.S. isn't just looking for a deal. They are looking for a new government in Tehran. And until that happens, the Strait of Hormuz will stay closed, the drones will keep flying, and your gas prices will keep rising. This is the cost of the new American war doctrine.